Welcome to Chamber Talks, the podcast where we dive into all things chamber related, from upcoming events and marketing strategies to policy discussions and business insights. We're here to keep you informed and engaged. As we step into March, Women's History Month is the perfect time to celebrate the achievements, leadership, and resilience of women in business and beyond. This month is all about recognizing the contributions of women, past and present, and what better way to do that than by coming together at the CNEW Women's Symposium. Happening on March 14th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the beautiful Fawn Lake Country Club. This year's symposium is centered around the theme, Elevate and Lead, Achieving Success in Business, Community, and Well-Being. It's a space for women to connect, learn, and grow. Whether they're navigating career transitions, stepping into leadership roles, or looking for ways to maintain balance in their lives. I'm Carly Swain Walker, Senior Vice President of Workforce and Community Development at your Fredericksburg Regional Chamber of Commerce, and your host today for the podcast Chamber Talks. We are thrilled to have two of our featured symposium speakers joining us today. First, we have Dr. Kimberly Young, Associate Provost for Career and Workforce at the University of Mary Washington. Dr. Young is passionate about helping professionals navigate career growth and transitions with confidence. Her session, Next Chapter, Navigating Career Growth and Transitions with Confidence, will provide valuable insights on taking control of your career path and making empowered decisions about the future. We're also joined by Barb Gustavson, founder of Discover Next Step, and a leadership coach specializing in resilience and well-being. Her session, Back in the Driver's Seat, Reframing Stress and Burnout to Reclaim Your Energy, will help attendees shift their mindset around stress and development strategies to regain control of their time, energy, and work-life balance. Welcome, ladies. Please do a quick intro of yourself. We'll start with Dr. Young.
Well, thank you so much, Carly. I'm so happy to be here. Love anytime I can share the room, obviously with you and definitely with Barb. So looking forward to the conversation today. I'm Kimberly Young, and I think you gave a description. I think, if I had to say anything about myself in addition to that, is that I'm very passionate about the just education, advancement of leaders and making sure that leaders have what they need, the knowledge, the skills to advance and to move into those spaces that their hearts desire.
Love that. And Barb, welcome.
Yes, I'm so thrilled to be here with you ladies. And like you shared, I'm in this space helping people build the resilience. And as I look at what I'm doing now, I realize it's an accumulation of what I've been through, not because I know it all, because I didn't know it all. I've had to figure things out. And I've learned that there's some really good tools to really combat some of these just these hidden barriers that we don't know exist. And I'm so grateful to be able to work with people. And there seems to be this shift in the last few years of people really waking up and desiring for more and wanting to know, what's my place in this world, not just as a job, but what gives me the greatest fulfillment. So I'm truly honored to bring about these conversations and have them with you today.
Well, I'm excited because I'm a huge fan of both of you ladies through your careers and all that you do for our community. And I would be remiss not to mention that you both play a huge role in our Leadership Fredericksburg program. Dr. Young being part of our faculty and Barb leading our advisory council at one point and also still serving on our leadership advisory council. So both of you ladies are leaders in our community, contribute to the chamber significantly in your volunteer roles, and we're so grateful, and I'm excited to be here with you. So let's dive in. So why do you all think that it's important for women and men to attend events like the Women's Symposium? And, how does that help them along the way when they attend events like this?
Ooh, I'll jump in really quick. I know for me, and I'm looking this from the lens of the brain itself. Often when we're in our own four walls doing our jobs day in, day out, we get in this routine. Now, it can really serve us well, but sometimes we need to really re-spark that creativity and getting out of our own four walls and doing it in a space where we're with other people who are excited to grow. This is where I think, and as I've experienced this is where we can have awarenesses that we may not realize. They're tiny shifts that we can change. And once we have the awareness of an aha moment or just a newfound idea that we want to implement, sometimes it starts with an event. And I've had this happen, at conferences, but almost always it's out of my house or out of my office.
Yeah. And I think it's with people who, some some you don't. Some you admire and respect, some you'd like to get to know and learn about them a little bit more. And I think that's really why kind of these gatherings are important. You hear new ideas. You learn too that you're not the only one and you're not alone. And I think that for me, that's probably the biggest piece. We can go through our careers or our lives and we're like, oh gosh, am I the only one who feels this way? Or we could just think that. When you get in a room full of people who are doing kind of similar things, you start to realize that the struggles you have are the struggles that other people have, right? Yeah. And there's some solidarity in that, and there's some comfort in that, in knowing that you're still going to be successful, do the things that you're called to do, and that you have to do, even though you are having these challenges, because you see these other people around you who are doing the same thing. And then you can also get some strategies from them about, how did they handle those things, whether it's transitions or the stress in their lives.
Yeah, I love that. I love you use the word re-spark your energy, I think is what you said, Barb. That's really cool. Just re-sparking, and then with you, Kimberly, you talked about like coming together and exchanging best practices and feeling comfortable in a room with people that are dealing with similar things like yourself. I mean, that's huge in itself, because a lot of us get in those silos in the work environment and we're just plugging away, but we're either alone if you work remote or, even just in an office setting, but you're still in your silo and you're not able to bounce off those ideas and re-spark that creativity as easily. So that's part of the reason why I think you should come and join us at the CNEW Women's Symposium. Why do you think these kind of conversations are important? So we're talking a little bit about balance and career transitions and stress management. Dr. Sarah Calveric will also be one of our featured speakers, and she's going to talk about rest and recovery and a little bit about that balance. Why is it important to have those kind of conversations and be a little vulnerable with each other around those topics?
Yeah, so I talked about the challenges in getting together and having those conversations, and I think there's also a little bit there's something to the celebration, right, of the successes and kind of finally tackling maybe something that has been a challenge or that was a goal for someone. I can't stop talking about, for instance, reorganizing my office at home, my home office. And Barb knows this, and probably anyone who ever has talked to me in the last couple of months knows this, that I reorganized my office, and I really thought, and I was intentional this time about making the center of the office, the center space, the space that's available for meditation, a little bit of yoga, maybe Pilates if I'm feeling ambitious, but like this space that is not only dedicated to work, but it's really about my entire being. And so getting in a room like this and having conversations, it's a time to share and celebrate, kind of a recovering, still sort of workaholic and, like myself, and being able to find those moments of reflection and rest and rejuvenation so that I can think about what's next, right? Mm-hmm. That's important. And those are important conversations to have.
I agree. I love celebrations. Actually, celebrations is always on my team agendas. Mm-hmm. So we close out every meeting. Everyone has to celebrate something.
Oh, I love that.
Even if it's something minor, like my coffee creamer and my coffee were on equal distribution today. Something so simple, or something major, like, had a birthday this weekend, or, whatever it may be. So I am a huge fan of celebrations and making sure that everybody celebrates those small and big moments. Yeah, so I like that a lot, Kimberly. And Pilates, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been leaning into that a little bit lately, so I'm here for it. What about you, Barb? Why are these conversations important?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what Kimberly talked about reflection, because I know for me and people that I've talked to, events like this are a great time for reflection, a chance to pause, because often we're going full speed ahead. We rarely have an opportunity to take a step back and look back and see how things are going, and just doing a drop in or check in with ourselves and being able to reflect on some of the topics that will be introduced. And I know we're going to be talking about well-being. I know self-care is going to come up, and also stress, anxiety, some of these things, that give us stress, even thinking about talking about stress. So what I really envision is reframing the conversation about stress. Like, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to take a look at what we believe about anxiety. And I have a book with me. Listeners can't see it, but it's called Good Anxiety. I know that sounds kind of twisted, but the author is Dr. Wendy Suzuki. I really love it just because it shows the other side of anxiety. And what they found through science is some anxiety is really good. Like, it helps us make better decisions. It keeps us out of the trouble. It's kind of like our supervisor or cop. What we want to look out for is it too much? But sometimes what we believe about stress and anxiety actually produces more of it. So I'm really hoping that we can take this time to reflect, and for each of the attendees to start building a new relationship with some of these things that they've seen as negative.
I love that. I know, Barb, you're really good and purposeful about the pause. And you speak about, pausing, reflecting, absorbing. And I think that's spot on. I mean, that's really important when we're talking about especially busy life and a topic like stress and burnout. Like, pausing it sometimes is just all you need. Let's breathe. And maybe even think about, if we're having some anxiety around something, is it indeed good? That alone is I'm gonna read this book now for sure, but that flips things on its head a little bit, and thinking about, like, anxiety doesn't always have to be bad.
Yeah, it can be motivation too.
It can be,
Absolutely.
it can get you going in the right direction, which I think is awesome. So, Dr. Young, your topic is talking about navigating career growth and transitions. Career transitions can be very overwhelming and feel overwhelming. Speaking of stress, anxiety.
Right.
What's your best advice for someone considering, like, a major career change?
Yeah. So I have written blogs about this. I don't know, maybe there's a book somewhere. But I really encourage people to think about the collection of experiences that they want. So transition is literally change, right? And change is hard and it's stressful. And it definitely can be overwhelming. But when we kind of pull it apart, especially in terms of career or that next step, whatever that is, oftentimes we say, okay, well, I'm bored in my job, so I need to go find a new job. I need to work somewhere else or do something else, right? Or this person made me mad in my organization, or I have a hard time with them, so I need to find a new place or new people to work with. When the reality is, if you think about kind of what gives you joy in your current role and what doesn't, kind of what takes that away, what takes your energy, you can start to lay out, okay, so as I shift into this next phase, what collection of experiences do I want? What kind of people do I want to work with? What kind of work do I want to do? What does that look like when I am exercising my gifts and the work that I do with joy? That way, you're not talking about where or what organization or specific people, and you can be a little bit more flexible and open and intentional about that next move, because the next move could actually literally could be in the same role, in the same organization, just reframing and rethinking what you're doing, right? You could say, well, if I look at my work as a third, this third of the work, I don't have to do it, right? Like,
Right.
or this could be done in a different way, and that could bring more joy and more productivity, right, to my role. It's also important to think about that collection of experiences, because then you can recognize when it shows up. Because if we're just set on change, we may miss the opportunity to do something that is really cool and perfect for the next step that has those experiences that we want, because it doesn't look like, or the title's not what we wanted. So I really like to encourage people to think about that collection of experiences.
I've never thought of those two words together, collection of experiences. When I think of a collection, I think of like maybe like somebody's collection of Barbie dolls or
Yes.
nutcrackers at Christmas time or something. I've never really thought about it as a collection of experiences. I really love that. That is really interesting. And I mean, I asked you a question about career transitions, and you answered it by saying, basically, think about what brings you joy in your current career before you think about transitioning to another. And that's also very sound advice, because you would think that you would instantly say, well, this is how you transition, and that's not where you started. That's really interesting. I like that a lot. Barb, you're talking about, which we talked about, career transitions can be overwhelming, and Kimberly talked about it finding what brings you joy. Your topic at the CNEW Women's Symposium is reframing stress and burnout. Many professionals wear stress like a badge of honor. Why is that harmful, and how can we shift our mindset around that?
Yeah, so if you look at the messages our society sends, it's almost like two different messages, get it done, go for it, go big or go home. And then there's this flip side, take care, self-care. And then there's this mixed signal that happens. And I think there's almost, the best way I can describe it is it creates this tug of war in our mind, but also in our heart. We feel pulled from so many directions, things that we want to do, things that we think we should do, things that we're responsible for. And I think the best example I can give is myself, because it's the first thing I thought of. I recently got out of a 15-year journey with my father, who battled Huntington's disease. And it's a very rare genetic disease. And being the only family member who was able to make decisions on his behalf, it really overtook my life. And there was a long stretch, a period of time where I honestly didn't know how to handle the stress or the burnout. And on the flip side, I had a business that I was excited about. I had a purpose that I really felt called to do. And I just had this tug of war in my heart going on. For many years, tug of war, feeling guilty, I just had this thing going on in my head and in my heart. It was really hard for me to distinguish. But because I didn't have clarity about what was going on and what I wanted, it really, and just the situation, the external, situation with my father, it did lead to burnout. And I think for me, it was not understanding the cost of helping too much. I didn't know what my boundaries were. And even a cost of caring too much. Those lines were very muddled for me. And there's science to show that there is an impact of listening too much, caring too much. The message is help, but it's not at all cost. And put yourself in that equation. So I've learned the hard way. It took me several times. There's this quote that a mentor shared with me that really stuck in my head, still does to this day, is listen to the whisper, don't wait for the 2x4. And I wish I could tell you that I listened to all the whispers. It took a few clunks on the head. But the thing is I look back and I realized it was a growing experience for me, and it's led me to the work I do, but also being able to use tools now that I know better, to put them into practice. So there's many different signs of burnout. Like for some, it's the obvious exhaustion. And what they found is not all burnout comes from doing too much. It could be from not doing the right things. So really examining all that you're doing. And sometimes that's simply sitting down with a piece of paper, writing everything that you're doing or everything that's been weighing you down. And it'll probably blow your mind just looking at that piece of paper. And, sleep deprivation, it impacts people with their sleep. But also for me, and this is hard to admit even today, but I was feeling really disconnected with my relationships, with my work, things that excited me once. I almost felt cynical. And that is actually one of the biggest symptoms of burnout, is feeling a detachment from things that you used to love to do, and even experiencing compassion fatigue, which is a real thing in many helping professionals. So really understanding the science, but also looking at myself and seeing what my signs and symptoms are. So they can be different for everyone, but there are some classic signs.
Okay. So I'm bridging the two of your answers together on the last questions, because Barb, you talked about, you mentioned like bring you joy, or maybe you're not doing the right thing. And Kimberly, you also talked about bringing joy. So I think what we're saying is, if you're thinking about a career transition, it may be because you're burned out or you're not in the right position. And so maybe sit down and write a list of what brings you joy in your current position, and you might reveal your own answer right there.
Yeah, I think so. And can I add a little bit to
Absolutely.
that too? There's also this idea of, as we become more competent in our role, right, it takes a little less energy, and we can do more. And for some of us, we do. So, that thing that, as in the learning curve when we first started the job, and it took us hours to figure it out. And then now we're 5 years in, and we can get it done in like a couple of minutes. And we fill in that space and continue to do more and more and more and more. Right. And so I think there's also that piece of saying, what of this doesn't have to be done, because we can have a tendency to add things to our own plates. And so that's a piece of it. And then also, what is it that we can or should add, right? So maybe we added all these things along the way because it was available, or it needed to happen. But then taking that moment, and I think we've said this so many times, all three of us, taking a moment, taking a beat, taking a pause, reflecting, right?
Right.
It's all about resting, taking that time, whatever it is, to then think about, okay, what's next, or how am I? How do I feel about what's happening right now? Right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that reflection piece is huge. We keep hitting on that, and that pressing the pause. And
I like to jump in on something too, because I've struggled with taking pauses, and something I've been intentional about doing, and some of my friends know this about me, is every month I get away by myself.
I love that.
And yet I have to tell you,
Yes.
Kimberly, it's been so hard to do, because I'm thinking, I've got so much going on, I don't have time to take a pause. But what I've learned is pauses are productive. Maybe not seemingly in the moment,
right.
but when I get back home and I'm feeling, restored, reset, I feel much more energized. And I realize the pause was a purpose. It was a purposeful pause.
Yeah.
So sometimes I have to kind of trick my brain into telling myself, this is actually going to help you even more in the long run.
Right. We all aspire to do it, Barb. We watch you from afar, like, oh, we want to do that too so badly.
Believe me, I still struggle when I schedule it, but it has served me well.
Oh, well, yeah, you're going to have to give us a page out of that book for sure, because I love watching you from afar again doing that. And you always seem so energized afterwards and talking about it, and, just being in that moment, which is wonderful. So
thank you.
Good for you. And I also wanted to thank you for sharing your personal story about your father, and what you're going through with him, and his disease and illness, and how it consumed you at times. That's being very vulnerable, and but you also talked about the lessons learned through that. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So, Kimberly, how can women advocate for themselves when seeking new opportunities, whether it's a career or a community opportunity, or even an opportunity at their church or place of worship? Like, how can they advocate for themselves?
Yeah, I think the place to start is to know what you want. And so I have been a witness to and a party to times when someone is trying to advocate, but it's clear they're not really quite sure what they want, right? It's just, I want more, or I want different. And that's good. That's a starting place. It's not the point at which you begin the conversation. So getting really clear about the thing that you're asking for, the ask, is important. So that's one. And then understanding, you mentioned a moment ago, Barb, the cost of caring, there's a cost of everything, right? Like there's this trade-off, this opportunity cost. If I do this, I can't do that. If you lived in my head for most of my life, you would know that sometimes I forget that, right? That I could do all of the things, right? But, you can't be on all the boards. You can be on, if you're on this board, that means you can't be on that board. If you're going to volunteer here, it means you can't do that. And sometimes it's very difficult for us to let go of things so that we can grab a hold of other things. But know what we want, understand the cost of that, understand what we're willing to give up to hold on to it or to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's what prepares us with, or points us in the direction. If there's data that needs to be gathered, right? So some evidence, we do that. And then we go to the table to have the conversation, because then we can be clear, right? We can be clear about the advocacy. Otherwise we're kind of wishing and dreaming and that's not helpful, and certainly not advocacy. Right. So that's what I would say.
That's really good advice. I was a little bit younger in my career. I said yes to everything. Mm-hmm. Oh, go ask Carly. She'll say yes. Yeah. And I learned very quickly that if it didn't bring me joy, or I didn't really like stop and say like, what does this mean for me to serve in this capacity? Or what does this mean for me to volunteer in this capacity? It became very muddy. And I really wasn't sure why I was there. Yeah. And so once I realized, like, you got to take a minute, like, to your point, collect the data, understand what it is that I want. Do I really want to do this? Or am I just saying yes because they flattered me by asking me?
Flattering. Yeah.
Right. And so I've found myself in better opportunities that were more fitting for me by doing that. So that's really great advice. Yeah. And especially for those younger in their career that are yes people.
Yes. Well, and I'm gonna say, working at a university, I also want to say there is something to kind of being open to lots of opportunities, right? Mm-hmm. Like we talk to our students a lot about who are coming out of university, going into the workforce and saying, who might say, I don't really like that. I don't want to do that job. And I'm like, you know what? Try it out. Like that's where that collection of experiences, it works at every stage, right? Where you're like, well, I thought you said you wanted to be creative, or you want to, let's try that and see. Right. And then you can always, kind of say no, pivot, learn that this is not what you want to do. Right. Yeah. But if we don't have those experiences coming out of the gate, then we're not going to know what to compare it to as we advance in our careers. And so what you said is so important. And I see you, Carly, making choices and trade-offs and doing really amazing things in this community because you're intentional in choosing how you show up and what rooms you show up. And that makes a difference. But if you hadn't said all the yeses in the beginning, you wouldn't have anything to compare that to now so that you know what you want to say yes or no to.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Thank you for saying that as well. I appreciate that compliment. But you and I both work in a field where it's about career exploration for our students. And to your point, like, no, say yes to that, or go check it out, because you might think that you want to be a nurse, but then you go do a shadow at, Mary Washington Healthcare, and you're like, whoa, this is not for me. Mm-hmm. Not at all. So definitely say yes in that younger part of your career and coming out of college or coming out of high school, whatever that looks like for you. But then once you do know what you want, then the ability to say, like, maybe that's not the right fit for me. So yeah, I like that too. That's really good. Barb, speaking of like saying yes too often, I think that can definitely cause burnout for people because they're doing just too much. What are some early warning signs of burnout that people often overlook?
That they often overlook. So one of the things I'm going to be talking at during our day is, and we've talked about this as the words come up, is energy. A lot of people want to focus on time management. I'm going to be focusing on energy management, and I'm going to be walking them through some of our unknown energy drains, things that we tend to not see as energy takers in our life. And aside from the doing too much, one of the energy drains that I've experienced is overthinking. Like our brain is actually the most energy hungry organ in the body. And if we're spending a great deal of our time overthinking or ruminating on like the automatic negative thoughts, I call them the ants, that actually takes up physical energy and depletes us and takes us from the things that we can focus on. So something that I know for me that has been a sign or has been accumulating to lead to burnout is overthinking. Overwhelmed is another one. Feeling overwhelmed, because what we're doing when we're overthinking and overwhelming, we're not able to self-regulate our nervous system. And we've actually sent, our thoughts, our mind into a fight or flight. It's responding the same way as it would physically. And so really learning how to regulate ourselves again, that's a key part of this. But a lot of it is being aware, like I had no idea that this was part of my problem. It was my thoughts that were running, and wreaking havoc in my mind and causing these energy leaks.
Energy. And Kimberly, you talked earlier about making it purposeful in your office space to have a place for meditation, yoga, Pilates, and that's all energy work.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about that and like just exactly what Barb was talking about. Yeah.
It's funny, as Barb was talking, I was thinking about, I was like, gosh, was she in my head this morning? So my home office is divided into thirds. I have a reflection zone, which is a chase lounge with a nice cozy blanket, books, journal. It's where I write, where I reflect, where I read. And then that meditation kind of active zone in the middle, which is at the center of everything. And then the third zone is the work zone. So that's my computers. I have a table. I can spread things out. My desk, all of my stuff, right, that I work with. But in that reflection zone this morning, it's interesting. I'm a journaler. And I literally was journaling. I've come off of UMW is in spring break this week for the students.
Oh.
We who work there are still working, everyone. But the students are on break. And so that changes the energy, the kind of literally the vibrance of the workplace. And it gives us some time to kind of come down a notch, right? Like to kind of think about those projects that we maybe shelved or that sort of thing. And this morning, as I was preparing for the day, I literally was journaling. I was like, I'm really working hard to tell my brain to slow down because it's over revving from the prior week. And I know logically, I'm pointing at my brain, logically, I do not have to think this hard. I don't have to rev like I was last week. But for some reason, I cannot turn it down. So I started thinking about blenders, all kinds of motors, right? Like just turn the motor down, right? And so that you can just, kind of have this week and use it for what I had intended it for, which is to work on some classes and develop some things, right? To have creative space that I can't have when I'm busy overthinking. So yeah, that reflection time is super important. And my visual is definitely a motor. It's a Vitamix. And to be more specific, right? And it's going from 10 to 2. 10 to 2, just kind of turn it down and then turn it off. Like, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's funny. Well, those of us that know that you're a foodie and an excellent cook. So it's funny that yours is a Vitamix.
Of course.
Mine is a paintbrush.
Oh,
and
I love it.
So I will pick different colors. And if I just need to like take it all out, I just literally paint it black. And just, okay, let's just stop and start over because there's just too much going on up there. So I love that Vitamix though. You're so funny. Barb, you talked about earlier the tug of war with your heart in your head. And then you also talked about the fight or flight mode. So those are two similar things in my brain. They are, which ties to burnout and not finding the right energy and those type of things. What can you explain a little bit more of why you use those two analogies?
Yeah, I think for me, the analogy and what I've learned, and I think the message that I'm really wanting for people walk away with is that, yes, stress and burnout are real, and yes, they're hard, but it doesn't have to be a roadblock. It can be, a signal for us for change, to really take a pause and look at ourselves. And I think for me, this tug of war that I have felt for many years in my heart and, in my head, I thought was pulling me apart. But then I realized it was actually pulling me together. And it was creating this wholeness, but it was disrupting every thought pattern, every habit that I've had up until this point. And it gets messy when you really start to challenge your beliefs, your habits, and it causes you to look in the mirror and see the good, the bad, the ugly. And so I think why that has been really key for me is to remind myself when things feel like they're falling apart. What if there's some things coming together? And yes, it's messy. And yes, I can acknowledge. But what if I don't have to figure out everything right now? And what if I can just step back sometimes as the observer and just recognize there might be something bigger at play that I don't know how it's going to work out. But I know in some way or some fashion, it is. And when I think about the nervous system, I mean, you think of a healthy heartbeat, there's these ups and downs, and that's the nervous system. It goes up and down, a very healthy nervous system. So you're supposed to have these high intense moments, rushes, and then you have these low moments, and then you have in between. And I think where we sometimes get stuck is when it stays up too high, and it's called a state of hyper arousal. When we have too much going on and we start to explode, we reach that tipping point. And then the opposite, the hypoarousal, we feel disconnected and we don't have that healthy ebb and flow. So for me, they kind of work. It's harder to put into words, but I realize it's the highs and lows in life that make life wonderful. Yeah. But if we just focus on the lows, that's where sometimes we forget to look at the big picture and realize there's still good happening.
Absolutely. There's always good happening. That is for sure. God, you just blow my mind, Barb. You're so good.
I'm in a room of amazing women. So.
I mean, I could just listen to you forever. I mean, you're just the way you bring like mind, body, and soul together, and how you talk about leadership and topics like burnout and energy and good anxiety. You're an incredible leader, and I'm grateful to be among you and Dr. Young today. It's just really cool. So
thank you.
I was supposed to be here today.
Yes,
so yes,
there you go.
Kimberly, talk to us or share a story about a time when you or someone you worked with successfully navigated a big, whether career transition or, transition to a new community or a new church or, something along those lines.
So I'll talk about before coming to Fredericksburg, actually. So in my previous job, which was in Kansas City, and I was the worst title ever, Executive Director of Executive Education, and the Executive MBA. I mean, it's just, talk about saying yes to a lot of things, right? I'd done that job. I stayed there. I was there for 10 years, it turned out. When I went there with intention. I knew what I was going there for. The collection of experiences I was looking for was working with smart people. I wanted to be entrepreneurial. I wanted to work for an organization that was a connector in the community. So I knew I didn't want to work for a company, right? I wanted to work for an organization that pulled different people from different organizations together.
Right.
And I knew that I wanted to be creative and have some financial responsibility. So that was the collection of experiences that took me to my job at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And probably about, 5 years in, at that point, I kind of moved jobs, either promoted or done something different every between 4 and 6 years. And so it was about 5 years. And I remember thinking at that moment, I was just like, there's no shortage of things to do, so I can't quite say that I'm bored, but I'm bored. And coming to that realization and saying, I like what I do. I love the team that I've built. I love, many aspects of this role. And those experiences absolutely came together the way I wanted them to. But it just didn't feel right anymore. And so I had a choice. I could reinvent in my role, look for another role. And I spent probably about a year trying to figure out what that new collection of experiences was. It was a year. And kind of trying to think about, like, so how does this change and what is it? And what's interesting, it was around year 8 or so by the time I kind of got those things solidified in my brain. And what I realized is that the reason I was having such a hard time is because that new next step, this next phase for me, it wasn't actually even about the job. So over those next 3 to 4 years, I changed things in the job. I, added different aspects of my team. I leaned into team development a little bit more. But what I realized is that it was personal. This next phase for me was personal. And it was about how I leaned into my family life and what that looked like and what might happen if my family life was the priority over the job, right? The job's important, the work's important, but what would happen if that were the case? And so my collection of experience, it expanded and it changed and it evolved into looking for a role, but really kind of leaning into relationships that I probably would not have years prior. And it was really rewarding and fulfilling. But I knew where I was, right? And so knowing where you are and understanding and knowing what you want. So I really got clear about what I wanted out of that next phase and kind of why there was angst, why, I had that feeling of just, I'm not comfortable anymore. I want to do something different. And then being open to how the universe would fill that or fulfill that. And so, that was my change.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were very purposeful in that. And we talk about in Leadership Fredericksburg, the WFS, which is work, family, self.
Yes.
And you were flipping that, it sounds like.
Yes.
You were looking at that in a very different way and putting more of your eggs in the family and self basket. And
absolutely.
I
spent time with my dad every week. They were in town, right? My mom, we made purposeful dates, right? I made sure that a few times a month I was visiting my grandfather who was still alive, still living, and really leaned into those relationships. And my grandfather's no longer with us, but gosh, I don't have any regrets. We spent so much fantastic time talking and taking pictures, and I recorded his stories. And it was just it was a great and beautiful and wonderful time.
Right. Yeah. That's something about leadership is that you have to be self-aware. And to your point, Kimberly, you've hit on a couple times today is knowing what it is that you want. And even with Barb, knowing like what energy are you looking for? What energy level do you thrive in? When are you at that fight or flight mode? When is your heart and head tugging against each other? And something about you, Kimberly, you're very aware of your strengths and what you bring to the table and how to pull your energy in different directions. And I think it's just cool. You're really great at that. And you're a true example of that to your students and the people that you work with at the university and people in the community as well. So it's a treat to have you around for sure. Barb, what are some simple techniques women can use to reclaim their energy and feel more in control of their work and life? And like we just talked about, the work, family, self piece.
Okay. There's a lot of helpful tips out there. I'll share what's worked for me and what I found. First, for me, it's more of awareness, is realizing that maybe the stress, maybe the anxiety, it isn't a battle, even though I was fighting it, but it's a message. And, what if the stress and anxiety is telling me, what is it telling me about what I need to change? So just that realization for me really shifted. And the other piece of that is to not fight the stress and the anxiety, because that actually accumulates the stress. That was most of my stress, is trying to get rid of it. And the realization that my husband, who I'll give an example, I was talking to him yesterday and kind of talking things through, and he's an engineer. I usually don't understand half of what he's saying, but he said something that kind of stuck with me. He says, well, when we're building systems, even software programs, we have to build a structure that can withstand the stress of bugs that happen and stuff. And he says, we expect stress, like we know it's going to happen, but it's the structure, the foundation that we focus on to help withstand the stress. And that got to me thinking, is if we can find what our structure is, what is something that can help us withstand the stress? Like, it's going to happen. We can't avoid it. Right. But there's things that we can put in place and tools. And a really great place to start that I found is to question my thoughts. Because often my thoughts, those ants I was talking about earlier, that's what gets me stuck. And it's not all the negative thoughts, but it's what are the ones that I'm attaching myself to. And for me, I can think of an ant, this is too hard, or will I ever get through this? And questioning that thought, because that thought alone is actually wiring in your brain. That's a structure in your brain. But the good news is you can change that structure just by simply questioning your thought and asking, is that thought really true? Like, is it true 100% of the time? And seeing the contrast, like, who am I, or how am I feeling and behaving when I think that thought, this is too hard, I'll never get through this. And then seeing the opposite, who am I without that thought? How do I feel now? And sometimes that helps your brain just naturally start to solve it. But I found the most important piece is to replace that thought, create a turnaround statement that will combat that thought. And if you're having a really bad day, a super positive thought, you may not believe, but even just the thought, I know in the end I'm going to get through this, or I will find the support I need. And I've gotten through hard things before. So actually giving your brain, in your mind, evidence that, yes, this is hard, but there's also a way for you to get through it. And they found simple techniques like that can really change the rewiring your brain. There's a big term, it's called neuroplasticity, and it just simply means that you have the ability, your brain can adapt and grow, and you can think new thoughts.
Wow. So you don't need a group of people. You don't need a podcast. You don't need, I mean, you could use these things, obviously, but, and I hope you listen to this one, but you just need yourself, as what you're saying, Barb, and you need to just have the ability to rewire, rethink, repurpose some of those thoughts around what stress feels like.
Yeah. And I will add too, and I don't ever want to discount, because people are going, like, just look in the world, even this week, there's a lot of difficult things going through. There's things that we can't control or get rid of right now. And one of the things that I had to really come to terms with is, especially with the care of my dad, is I may not be able to, be out of the situation for however long. I might be exhausted for a really long time. But something that helped me was I can still create space for bringing in energy. Like Kimberly was talking about meditation, that creates space. That gives you energy to deal with the hard stressors in your life. So bringing more of that in your life, like even having a joy list. One one of my mentor, or she was my coach, she had me create a bliss list.
I love
And
that.
it's all the tiny things that give me joy.
Mhm.
So I can decide in advance, picking something small from that list. So bringing those things in can actually help us become more resilient, even while challenges are happening.
Wow.
And I have a similar thing that I do with myself. I ask some similar questions, right? Like if something's going on, say, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And then if you called it an ant, Barb, if it's a negative thought, then I say, well, what is your evidence that this is true?
Ooh.
Right? And then what is your evidence that it's not true? And then I can go on. And a lot of times I'm like, well, this has happened. I've gotten through it before. So my evidence says I'll get through it again.
Right.
Like literally, I have been at this point and I am fine. And so there's no reason for me to be fearful, anxious, whatever it is, right?
Right.
In this moment, I can feel that and move on, knowing that I will be in a different place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And The Happiness Habit is a book that I've been reading, and it's similar.
That's
it
a
talks
good
about
one.
a fun list, right? I like bliss list better.
Bliss list and
Yeah, I
a
like
fun
that.
list. Okay. I love that. I think about it from we try to categorize things in our lives like, oh, that's very negative, or oh, that's super positive. But in my thoughts, it doesn't, sometimes it's not either.
Yeah.
It's just there. Like I say, it is what it is. My husband hates when I say that, but sometimes that is very true. So that is really, really good advice, Barb, is that you have the ability, and Kimberly, it sounds like you're doing it as well, but you have the ability to help yourself through it. And you don't necessarily need to go outward. You can stay inward and still tackle stress and anxiety and some of the things that are bogging you down. So that's incredible advice. And again, I could talk to you ladies forever, but we are coming towards the close of our podcast today. Would either of you like to share anything else before we close up?
I think for me, I think the first question you asked Kimberly about become an advocate, what stands out for me is becoming your best advocate for you. And that's something I'm learning and growing in this season. But because no one is going to speak for us but us. But when we can encourage ourselves and not expect that from other people and become our best advocate, we can then be one of the best advocates for other people.
I love that.
I love that too.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And I second that emotion, and I would say knowing yourself and not being afraid to acknowledge and admit what you want, right? So I started before with first you have to know what you want. Oftentimes we know what we want. We're just afraid to admit it.
Say it.
Yeah. So say it. That's the first step for advocacy.
Yeah.
Self.
So become your own advocate, or you're the best self advocate, and say it out loud.
Yeah. Admit it.
I know what I want. You just got to say it out loud sometimes.
Grab a hold.
And multiple times in the mirror until you hear it.
And high five yourself.
Yes. That's right.
Affirm yourself.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, you can affirm yourself in meditation. There's a lot of methods around that. So, but we'll talk about meditation on another podcast.
Yeah. And we affirm each other at events
Absolutely.
like the Symposium.
Yes.
Which is what it's, right?
Yes.
That's what it's all about.
I mean, you can think about the Symposium as an affirmation circle. You're going to walk away from there feeling empowered and eager and ready to conquer what's next for you. So, again, and you're going to hear from fabulous speakers like you've heard from today. So if you go ahead and get your ticket to the CNEW Women's Symposium, you will hear more from Dr. Kimberly Young, as well as from Barb Gustavson, Dr. Sarah Calveric, and we're also going to have a panel of experts talking about wealth management for women, which is going to be awesome. It's going to share a lot about what we can be doing to make sure that we are ready for retirement someday and spend more time meditating and doing some self-awareness activities, hopefully. As we celebrate again Women's History Month through the month of March, let's continue to uplift, support, and inspire the women in our lives and workplaces. The CNEW Women's Symposium is just around the corner, and seats are limited. So if you haven't secured yours yet, now is the time. A huge, huge thank you to Dr. Kimberly Young and Barb Gustavson for joining us today on Chamber Talks and sharing a sneak peek of their sessions. That is it for this episode of Chamber Talks. Be sure to subscribe and check us out and stay connected for more insights on Chamber events, business strategies, and community impact. See you at the Symposium on March 14th. Thank you.